Hello, everybody. This topic today is the Cold War. Okay, so think about what we mean by cold. All right, so imagine this, man, my girlfriend's being cold toward me. Well, that's a little different than her, yelling at you and throwing things at you. Being cold does not imply actively being violent towards you, it's more like the silent treatment. So the Cold War is not an actual war. Okay, the United States never fought the Soviet Union. Okay, if we had, we'd all be dead because both the United States and the Soviet Union had incredible armies and still do. But the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, but Russia still has nuclear missiles. They could destroy every one of us, and we can destroy every one of them more than once. And so look at this cartoon. You've got both sides with nuclear missiles, and each side says on no account to be used because the enemy might retaliate. So it's like if I have a gun to your head and you have a gun to my head and neither one of us pulls the trigger, that's basically what the Cold War was. And you do not need to memorize these years, but you need to understand that this is what was going on after World War II, all the way up until the early 90s. Okay, the Soviet Union doesn't exist. They went bankrupt right around 1991, and then they broke up into Russia, Ukraine, Georgia, lots of other countries but the Soviet Union does not exist anymore. Okay, so what is the Cold War? It is a time of rivalry. We were not enemies of the Soviet Union, and they were not our enemy, but boy, did we not trust each other. We were rivals for world influence. We almost went to war a few times, but thank God we didn't because we could not survive a war. We definitely couldn't win, but neither of us would survive. We'd all be cockroaches. In nuclear war, there are no winners. Okay? The two sides of the Cold War, I've never seen this on the EOC, but NATO, that is our military alliance. So if you attack one of us, you attack all of us. That same thing that caused World War I, we still have. We still have military alliances because after World War II, we felt like we needed a military alliance because we were scared of the Soviet Union. Warsaw Pact, I've never seen this on the EOC, but basically Stalin, the Soviet leader, got all of his countries and he forced them to be a part of the Warsaw Pact. They didn't have a choice. Okay? So what happened? During World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union were allies. We were on the same side because we had a common enemy, Nazi Germany. Okay? And so we helped the Soviets helped us. So what happened? What did we ever do to make them not trust us? And what did they do to make us not trust them? Okay. Now, I've never seen this before on the test because, we're in the United States, so we like to teach history from our perspective. But one thing that we did that the Soviets didn't like is we developed the atomic bomb in secret. Remember the Manhattan Project? That was a top secret project. And Stalin had spies all over the Manhattan Project, and we didn't know. Another thing is during World War II, we delayed getting involved in World War II too long. Stalin was like, hurry up, Americans, we need help. The Nazis are killing us over here in Moscow. And the Americans are like, we're not ready. And we delayed it. Think about it. Pearl Harbor was December 7th, 1941. D-Day, the beach invasions of France, was June of 44. That's 2.5 years. And there was a feeling that we were delaying it because as long as Hitler was killing Soviets, then we were just going to hold back, and then we could get rid of two enemies at the same time. Okay? Now, this could be on the test. What did they do to make us not trust them? Stalin promised to have elections in conquered countries like Poland, but didn't. He just took over Eastern Europe. Okay? Another thing, the Soviets would not let the United States bomb Japan from their soil. We could have taken out the Japanese, no problem, but the Soviets did not trust us. They did not trust us. So we're kind of mad at them for that. Okay? Plus, Stalin was a dictator. Stalin was worse than Hitler, really, if you really look into it. So check it out. What we've got here is FDR in the middle, and then Churchill of the English on the left, and then Stalin on the right. And everybody's all nudgy and everybody's all friendly. They're all like, you know, we're going to win this war. And it did look like we were going to win the war at the time, and we did. Everybody was happy in February of 45 at the Yalta Conference. But then, look at this. Potsdam, July. Hitler is dead, and all of a sudden, look at the chairs. The British are touching, but there's a little distance between Stalin and Truman, who was the American president. And so you can see that things have changed. We know at this point that the war in Europe is done. And now everybody's thinking Stalin is the enemy. And maybe he was. All right. I have never seen this on the EOC, but the Iron Curtain is an invisible border between communist Eastern Europe and capitalist Western Europe. It wasn't a wall, but it was an invisible barrier between communist Eastern Europe and capitalist Western Europe. So you talk about crossing the Iron Curtain, you know, and where travel was restricted and spies were always trying to cross. And if you lived in Poland, you couldn't just take a vacation in Italy. It wasn't going to happen. The communists would not let you. They did not have freedoms. They didn't have rights like people did in Western Europe and in the United States. Okay? This is important. This is Germany after World War II. This is the country of Germany. Notice that Germany was divided into occupation zones. You got the British sector, you've got the American sector, the French sector, and then you've got the Soviet sector. And trust me, the Soviets deserve to have a chunk. The Soviets lost 22 million people in the fight against Nazi Germany. So, but look at what happened here. Look at the city of Berlin. You see how it's white? Well, check this out. Since it was the capital city, everybody wanted to divide the city up into sectors. Okay, you see how the city is surrounded by Soviet territory? Well, watch this. This is the city of Berlin. And the city itself was also divided into sectors. Outside the city is all Soviet Germany, but the city itself, you had Soviet East Berlin, you had French sector, the British sector, and you had the American sector of Berlin. So look, the American and British and French sector were all surrounded by Soviet territory. In the 1960s, this right here will be the Berlin Wall. Okay? So, which group of countries became Soviet satellites after World War II? And so, in other words, which parts became controlled by Stalin? And the answer are the Eastern European countries, Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia. So the answer is B. The answer is B. That is not an EOC question. Okay? All right. All right. What is the Marshall Plan? This is important. The United States gave money to countries so they wouldn't turn to communism. Notice I put a $ in Marshall. That's to help you to trigger your memory. So in other words, we were throwing money at a problem. The United States became the richest country in the world after World War II. And the United States goal was to do what we could without starting a war. So we threw money at Western Europe. We offered money to everybody, but we threw money all over the place because the United States, remember, we weren't destroyed by World War II. Our factories weren't bombed. Virtually no civilians were killed in World War II, only 440,000 troops. But other countries, civilians died. Millions of troops died, and it destroyed their economies. Our economies, by the early 1950s, the United States economy was booming. So we were throwing money at a problem. We did not want other countries to turn desperate and turn to communism. That's what happened to Germany in the 30s. They turned desperate and turned to Nazism. We were afraid that France and Italy and England might turn to communism if we didn't throw billions of dollars at them. So look at this. We threw billions of dollars at France and at England, Ireland, Iceland. We threw money at Italy, West Germany. We threw money all over the place. But the Soviets and their satellite countries, they refused to take any of our money. They were too proud. I don't blame them. Remember, nationalism. They were nationalistic. But this is the Marshall Plan, to financial aid to countries so they would not get desperate, to stabilize their governments, to stabilize their economies, so they would not turn to communism. Here's a meme. Okay. All right. The Marshall Plan was designed to stop the spread of communism by providing what? Okay, hit pause if you need to, but the answer is funds, money. The Marshall Plan was about money. Okay, throw money at the problem. The purpose of the Marshall Plan after World War II was to do what? Okay, hit pause. But the answer is throw money at them and to stabilize their governments. Okay? All right, now this is an EOC question. So you got post-World War II events. World War II devastates Europe's infrastructure and that word infrastructure shows up on the test. And economies. That leads to your answer. And that leads to improved political stability, closer ties with the United States, recovering economies. Okay, hit pause if you need to. The answer is financial assistance. So they didn't mention the Marshall Plan, but they referred to the Marshall Plan. Okay, and if you're still reading B and C, that means you didn't hit pause and you need to. Okay. All right. So in 1948, the Soviets cut off Berlin. Berlin is surrounded by Soviet territory. How will we supply our people, the people of Berlin? Well, there is what's called the Berlin Airlift. The United States took a bunch of cargo planes, and the same pilots that were bombing Berlin just a few years ago were now dropping supplies on Western Berlin. They were dropping chocolate bars, they were dropping blankets, fuel, and sometimes they weren't dropping, sometimes they were landing and unloading the planes. But the point is that the United States and England, they were flying over Soviet territory, and which is dangerous. They were flying over Soviet Germany to supply people of West Berlin. What would happen if the Soviets shot down our planes? We might go to war. And we did not want to go to war. Okay? You do not want to go to war with the Soviet Union. You saw what happened to the Nazis. The Soviets lost 22 million people and still won the war. Okay? So the Soviets decided one day to just block all railroads, all roads to Berlin. And so how did the Americans respond? By loading up a bunch of cargo planes and risking war by flying over Soviet territory to supply the people of our section of Berlin in West Berlin. That was a dangerous move because if they had shot down our planes, we may respond with war. Okay? So just a couple of pictures. So these are cargo planes. All right, as a result of the Berlin airlift, the United States was able to do what? Okay, the answer is A, bypass a Soviet blockade without provoking a military conflict. Blockade meaning they block access to Berlin. Okay. All right, let's talk about the space race. So the United States and the Soviet Union spent many years having a slightly friendly, but a little scary competition to have the best space program. And most of the time, the Soviets were winning. I mean, the Americans had one huge win over the Soviets, but the Soviets usually won. Let me go through some of the important events. This is important. In 1957, the Soviets did something that nobody had ever done before. They sent a satellite around the world. And it was small. It could fit in your room easily. It wasn't that big. You could hold it. You know, it's probably heavy, but it's like a big beach ball, basically. And it went around the world, and it just sent out a little radio signal. Bzz, bzz, bzz. That's it. That's all it did. But it scared the crap out of Americans. So write this down if you're taking notes. 1957, first Russian satellite. It was the first satellite ever in the world. Nothing was in space. Absolutely nothing was in space. It led to more money in public schools, and it led to NASA. Now that's important because that's a question. If you've ever wondered why we take so many science classes and why you're sitting in pre-cal, it all goes back to Sputnik, or Sputnik is what the Russians called it. All my life, and I grew up in the later part of the Cold War, we were always afraid that the Soviets were getting ahead of us. And so now schools started to get more federal money and schools raised the standards. So as a result of taking homemaking and cooking, you're taking pre-calculus because we need people to get us into outer space. We need to be smarter than the Soviets. Okay? And so now the Russians put the first living creature into space, a little dog named Laika, which means in Russian, little barker. Little Laika didn't make it back, but it was the first living creature that humanity ever sent in outer space. And then they sent the first space rabbit. You could see a rabbit here. You can see the two ears. I see a guinea pig, and I see like a ferret. And they sent them into outer space just to see what would happen, okay? To test the air pressure and all that. It was practice for humans. And then that's a very old meme, like a boss. And then they sent the first man into space, Yuri Gagarin. And even today, they have a big holiday in Russia to celebrate Yuri Gagarin Day, as they should. They should be proud. So the Russians did a lot of things before the United States. They had the first flyby of the moon, first moon impact, pictures of the far side of the moon. They landed a probe on Mars. They landed a probe on Venus. They did a lot of things before the United States did. They even sent the first woman into space. Her name is Valentina Tereshkova. And the United States had only been in space for 3 days, and they sent the first woman. And they even played up saying, women are equal under the Soviet system. You know, they're just trying to make us look bad at this point. And women were treated horribly in the United States in the early 60s. So yeah, they should play it up as much as they can. Okay? So in the 1960s, the United States was trying to catch up. Kennedy's commencement speech when he became president in early 61 said, we will go to the moon. We will go to the moon because it is hard. Not because it is easy, but because it is hard. And of course, everyone gives Kennedy credit for going to the moon, but it was Lyndon Johnson that was president that did most of the work. All right, so here's a trick question that most students miss. Who was the first American in space? And some of you said Neil Armstrong. Well, he was the first man on the moon, but it was Ham the chimp. Trick question, right? And Ham the chimp came back, so it wasn't like Laika the dog. And then here's a cartoon making fun of, because for a while Ham the chimp was the most experienced astronaut in the United States. Okay? The first human in space, American, was Alan Shepard. He just went up and came back down. The first to go around the world, orbit around the world, was John Glenn. And finally, the first American to set foot on the moon was Neil Armstrong. Second was Buzz Aldrin. And just a couple of years ago, Buzz Aldrin knocked the shit out of a guy who said, you never landed on the moon. And that was interesting. So Neil Armstrong on the moon in 1969. Nice. Okay. So what was the purpose of the space program? What was the point of all this? Well, it wasn't some nerd fantasy, I'll tell you that. If you can put a man up into space and let him orbit and bring him back, imagine what you can do with a nuclear bomb. And unfortunately, that was really a big motivation of the space program, is the delivery of nuclear missiles. Now look at this missile. This is from the 1980s. You notice how it has several different missiles on it? Each one of these can be independently targeted to different locations. It's called a MIRV, M-I-R-V. And you can make this missile go to Dallas, this one go to Fort Worth, this one go to Oak Cliff, that one go to Mesquite. You could just take out the whole DFW area with one missile. That's how bad nuclear missiles have gotten in the 80s. All right, so let's look at this question. Which of the following was a direct result of the 1957 launch of Sputnik? Okay, definitely not A. All right, so think NASA. The answer is B. The answer is B. Okay, federal agency dedicated to space exploration. That's NASA. Okay, all right. D kind of happened, but that will happen because of the arms race, not because of the space race. Okay, during the 1950s, the federal government funded educational initiatives in math and science in response to what? Okay, the answer is C. Sputnik. Sputnik. Okay. So you have between the United States and the Soviet Union an arms race. It was a race to have the biggest, most powerful militaries. Okay? and we all both had nuclear weapons. We had enough nuclear missiles to destroy them, and they had enough nuclear missiles to destroy us. And if we ever went into nuclear war, Santa Claus would have a real show. He'd see all kinds of missiles flying over him. And it takes about 30 minutes for the missiles to get there, and 30 minutes for theirs to reach us. So remember, I was talking about MIRV earlier. Each one of these can be independently targeted to a different city or suburb. So imagine a MIRV coming down. So here's a test in Alaska. Imagine, boom, that's Dallas. Boom, that's Plano. You see that? So, and all of these can have a nuclear missile on them. You could destroy the entire DFW area with just one MIRV. This is a GIF of the biggest nuclear explosion ever. It was in Russia. And I can't even imagine what this would do. But if this exploded in downtown Dallas, I don't think we could survive where we are. Okay. Here's an underwater nuclear explosion where they did it underwater, and all that water is going to be radiated now, and all the fish are going to give people cancer and stuff. But I think that's cool. That's a small nuclear bomb, but it's still pretty cool. Okay. And by the early 60s, you could launch nuclear missiles from submarines. So even if you were to destroy the United States, our submarines could still launch nuclear missiles at Soviet Union. We could park a submarine here and launch a missile at Moscow. That's how dangerous nuclear war has gotten. So the arms race, they had more missiles than we did, but it doesn't really matter. I mean, we had enough to destroy them, and they had enough to destroy us. It didn't really matter. So if you see something like that, you've got about 30 minutes to enjoy your vacation. Yeah. This is also important. Because of NASA and the space race, there were many technologies that were developed. For example, anything involving satellites. Okay? So without satellites, we have no internet, we have no cell phones. Also, freeze-dried foods was developed by NASA. UV blocking screens, anything blocking ultraviolet rays, that was developed to protect astronauts from the sun. Okay, also Kevlar and lighter helmets. That, titanium was developed by NASA to be lighter and stronger. Those are all technologies developed by NASA. Okay. So check out this EOC question. Which factor links all of these modern innovations? The EOC loves the word innovation. Why don't they just say inventions? Okay. And the answer is C. Similar question. These technological advances can all be traced back to which industry? And the answer is C. All right, so here is a time period question. Remember, you need to know the time periods. Roaring 20s, Gilded Age, Progressive Era, U.S. rise of world power. Which of the following is most characteristic of the Cold War? And the answer is A, the arms race. All right, the Truman Doctrine. I'm not sure if I've ever seen this on the EOC, but the Truman Doctrine says this: we, the United States, will support free peoples who are resisting communism. So if you rise up against the communists, then we will support you. Now, that's not true. In Czechoslovakia, they rose up against Stalin, and the United States did nothing. But basically, what the Truman Doctrine says is that we will go around the world and try to stop communism from developing in those countries. And this doctrine is going to lead us into the Korean War, the Vietnam War, and it's going to lead us into supporting people who are fighting against this communist. Domino Theory. I don't know if I've seen the word, but I've seen the concept on your test. Notice what color the dominoes are. Red. What does red symbolize? Communism. Remember the Red Scare? Okay. There was a Red Scare in the 20s and another in the 1950s. Red means communism. And so domino theory says this: since China fell to communism and then Korea fell to communism, then we need to go stop Vietnam from falling to communism, because if we do let it fall, then Laos will fall, then Cambodia will fall. And before you know it, communism will spread all over South Asia and Southeast Asia. So in a way, communism spreads like a disease. So now you know why we fought in Korea and Vietnam, to stop communism from spreading there. So why did we fight in Korea and in Vietnam? To stop communism. That's a very commonly tested topic. The reason for Korea and Vietnam is to stop communism from forming there. So let's talk about the Korean War. It was a short war. Truman was president. Communists invaded from the north, supported by 1 million Chinese troops. While we did support China during World War II, the communists took over because the communists promised the Chinese people help because people were starving. So North Korea became communist, and South Korea, the United States went there in the early 50s to resist communism there. And so the Korean War was not an American war. It was a war by the newly formed United Nations. So American troops went to Korea with UN stamped on the side of their heads. So the UN replaced the League of Nations. And the League of Nations failed to prevent World War II, but the United Nations is going to try to stop any major wars from happening. And yes, it has prevented major wars, but it has not stopped smaller wars. Okay? So look at this. Red Korean forces invade South. Red is communist. And here's a few jets in the Korean War. Korean War was cold, and some of these are World War II veterans. They come here, and it was miserable. It was miserable. So what are the results of the Korean War? An armistice was signed. There was a stalemate, a tie. So they decided that North Korea would be divided. North Korea will remain communist. South Korea will remain capitalist. And it was divided at the 38th parallel. That means 38 degrees north latitude. So we failed in containing communism. We contained it, but North Korea remains communist. Today, North Korea really isn't communist. It's just more of a dictatorship. They say they're communist, but they really aren't. All right, not an easy question, but this is a EOC question. What was the primary reason for U.S. involvement in East Asia during the early 50s? Now, East Asia, luckily they say Korea in all the answer choices. So just think something to do with containing communism. And the answer is A. During the Korean War, what prevented the southern part of the peninsula from falling permanently to the invading forces? Okay, the Americans did. The answer is the involvement of the UN forces under the command of the United States. Okay. And the Korean War is called the Forgotten War. It's like the troops came home, no parades, nothing. All right, the EOC has questions. Every time you take the EOC, there will be a question similar to this, where they take a person and they give you 4 quotes, and you have to pick the correct quote, given the context of the question. Which quotation from President Harry Truman offers a reason for U.S. involvement in the conflict in Korea? Okay, so without even looking at the quotes, I'm looking for something to do with containing communism. Okay, hit pause, but the answer is C. Okay. All right, that's enough for now. I'll do the rest in a separate part.